Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me fine? Excellent. So I just got promoted. So actually I'm the CTO for POET, but I appreciate the promotion, absolutely. I'll take that any day. So it's my pleasure to be here this morning. A lot of you may have never heard of POET, and that's not surprising. We're a private company located in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and really have been operating under the radar screen for about 25 years. But we've been one of the leaders in first corn ethanol and now one of the leaders going forward in cellulosic ethanol. And so hopefully you'll start to hear more about POET as we go forward. My role there, as it shows, is the Chief Technology Officer. I joined POET about a year ago, a little over a year ago. My background actually originally was animal nutrition, and I started my career with Monsanto Company in St. Louis. Ended up being divested by Monsanto as they changed the company and went through various iterations as they took their vision forward. Ended up with a company called Novus International out of St. Louis and was in the feed additive space for about 8 or 9 more years. And then ended up at Cargill for about 6 years. And then went down to the Research Triangle with Syngenta for 4 years. And then the last year before I came to POET, I was with a Danish enzyme company called Novozymes. So I've been very fortunate over the course of my year to work in food, feed, and fuel, and really get a good perspective on some of the advances that are happening in the biotechnology side, but also see the applications of that in the food business and the industrial industry. So been very lucky in my career. I'm going to show you just a brief commercial, and I apologize for this, but I knew this audience maybe didn't know a lot about POET. So I'm going to show you a 1-minute video clip which kind of walks through some of the key things that we do, and then I'll start my presentation and go forward. So let me show this real quick. So for those of you that were here last night at the hotel, this is probably helpful because it's a catchy tune and hopefully it woke everyone up. So I know a lot of us were out downstairs about 4 in the morning with a fire alarm. So hopefully that woke some folks up in the audience. Let me talk to you a little bit about the history of POET. We're a $6 billion company today. We're solely owned by a single individual, an individual named Jeff Broin. And we're based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But this is actually where it started, in a family farm in Minnesota with the Broin family farm. And they started looking at ethanol as an opportunity to supplement their farm income over about 25 years ago. As they began to be successful with ethanol, they were looking around for other assets to acquire and found this facility in Scotland, South Dakota. At the time, it only produced a couple million gallons of corn ethanol. Today, it can produce up to about 11, but we really operate it somewhere between 8 and 10. It's in Scotland, South Dakota, and it is the site of our POET Research Center. So as I'll mention in a few moments, we do a lot of piloting work before we take technologies commercial, and this is actually where we do it in this older facility. But it currently operates still as a corn ethanol facility and is very productive for us. This is an example of what a modern facility looks like. So this is a modern day corn ethanol facility. We have 27 facilities around the Midwest, scattered in South Dakota, in Minnesota, in Iowa, in Michigan, and Ohio. 27 different facilities that produce about 1.6 gallons of corn ethanol a year. You saw that number in the little flash video. This is the way we're organized. We're pretty unique among ethanol companies. We have our POET LLC, which is the center hub of the picture. I'm on the executive team of that organization. That's the main corporate entity. And then we have these individual operating entities that operate for the corporation. I have responsibility for 2 of these, POET Research Incorporated there at about 2 o'clock, and then POET Biomass LLC. The POET Research Organization, we have about 60 folks on my staff, which again is very unique in the ethanol space. Everything from enzymologists to molecular biologists to biochemists, engineers, and what we do is work on the next technologies that we're going to deploy in our facilities. That includes both on the corn ethanol side, but also on the cellulosic ethanol side, which I'll mention in a few minutes. And then POET Biomass LLC, that's the front-end feedstock contracting, collection, delivery business that we're establishing for our Project Liberty, which will be our first cellulosic facility in Emmitsburg, Iowa. The balance of the organization, POET Ethanol Products, markets all of our ethanol, so 1.6 billion gallons of POET ethanol, but also another 500 million gallons of third-party ethanol. POET Risk Management buys the grain for our facilities. POET Nutrition sells worldwide the oil that we extract out of our process, as well as the DDGs, that are distillers' grains that go into animal feeds. POET Biorefining is our refining piece of the organization. That's the staff that operates the 27 plants. We have about 1,600 employees in total. Most of those are in the POET Biorefining organization. POET Design and Construction, we actually design and build our own facilities as well as retrofit our existing facilities with new technologies that we roll out. And then POET Plant Management is the group that oversees the operations of the plant from a management perspective. So that's how we're organized today. So all of the new technologies that we develop or technologies that we license or partner for flow through my organization at POET Research. We act as the IP holding company for the organization, and then we license those technologies out to the plant. So this is the first time I've worked at a company where the R&D organization's in the black. So we're not a cost center. We actually generate revenue and margin for the company, and then I use that to run operations and then deliver money back to the corporation. In terms of research, again, we're pretty unique in that we can work on the bench. We have large laboratory facilities in Sioux Falls where we do a lot of our bench work. We have some facilities associated with our main building where we can do some very small scale piloting. But then we take our more intermediate scale piloting to Scotland, South Dakota at that first facility that I showed you. And that's where we do all the scale up before we run to our commercial facilities. We then can take it out to the plants, and so when my organization deploys technology to our plants, we work very closely with the POET Plant Management organization to work down a timeline of integration and rollout and monitoring or evaluating the performance of that technology as we bring it to our commercial organization. This is an example of a schematic, at least, of what we think the modern facility will look like. It includes a cellulosic facility on the lower right-hand side. You can see the feedstock delivery or collection area, the stack yard, if you would, which then flows into the cellulosic facility. The ethanol will come over here to be distilled in the corn ethanol facility. So we think the way going forward is to co-locate both corn ethanol facilities and cellulosic ethanol facilities to take advantage of the infrastructure, to share power, as well as to optimize the operation of both units. So with that kind of backdrop on POET, I'll now move forward and talk a little bit about why we think corn ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, and all the products coming out of the processing of corn are really benefiting agriculture both today and will in the future. If you take a look at this graph, this is kind of an artist's rendition of the fossil fuel age, if you would. Gas, oil, coal. All of us in this room were born in the very last half or last quarter of this age. And here we're harvesting, we've been very fortunate, we're harvesting resources below the ground that have been there for hundreds of millions of years. And they're a nice gift that we've unwrapped and we're taking advantage of. And it's really changed, it's driven the Industrial Revolution, it's really changed the way we do business, the way we live, the standard of life that we have. But there's some issues with that. At some point we're going to hit peak, and we can argue about when peak is and what that'll mean in terms of availability, but we know prices are going to go up. We know that health and environmental issues have become more and more prominent as we look at extracting these fossil fuels from the ground, and we have to be cognizant of these. But there's other issues as well. When we talk about subsidies, for instance, for renewables, or we look at the cost of sustainability today, we don't consider what the costs are to support the fossil fuels that we use today as well. Governor Romney in one of the debates talked about a $2 to $3 billion subsidy to oil. He had it partially right. It's closer to $6.5 billion for the entire fossil fuel industry. And these tax breaks or benefits are actually hardwired into the tax code. So this is an annual benefit that they receive. There's also up to $83 billion that we spend a year protecting the Middle East, particularly, trying to protect the oil that we use, protecting those lines and keeping that region open and free for trade. And then there's the 340, you've heard numbers maybe even up to 400, depends upon the price of oil. This is the annual transfer of wealth that we see from the United States to principally the Middle East, Venezuela, to purchase these fossil fuels. So there's a huge cost associated with using them, and people sometimes forget that. Ultimately, they're going to be depleted, and that's just a fact. We're not going to regenerate fossil fuels at a rate which would allow them to continue in perpetuity. So there's a cliff coming, and we can argue again about when that is, but we know that it is going to come. The reason why we're so optimistic at POET is we've been here before. We look to the past and we say, how did we operate before the fossil fuel age? And we really operated above the ground. All of the resources that we used for food, for feed, for fuel, they really originated from the sun, through the warmth of the sun, the radiation of the sun, photosynthesis, and we operated above the ground, and we were able to be sustainable. And before the fossil fuel age, we were making tremendous advances in the innovation and the use of those resources. And then we had this period of fossil fuels where we kind of stopped, and we took advantage, probably correctly, of that resource that we had, and we drove our industry and economy forward. But we're going to have to look beyond that, and really going forward in the future, POET believes that we're going to have to look back to more of a sustainable route. And we can discuss what's the best way to go forward. Is it wind? Is it solar? Is it hydroelectric? Is it renewables? We would suggest that it's all of those, including the continued use of our fossil fuels, but managing those knowing that there's an end point, and there's a point at which we're going to have to transition more fully. When we look at corn, there's a tremendous amount and if there are questions, be happy to talk a little bit about the drought this year and the issues that we're facing, but there's a tremendous amount of corn out there available for renewable fuel use. POET likes to say that we're in the solar energy business, so we're promoting the planting and the harvesting and the use of billions and billions of solar panels each year. And it's utilizing both the corn kernel, but now also the stover, the stalk, the leaf, the husk, the cob portion that also can be turned into fuel. If you look at corn yields, this is plots that are generated by our friends in the biotech seed business. We expect that by 2030, we'll be pushing 300 bushels per acre. This year, we're only going to be about 122. We all know that we're going through a drought. But even in one of the worst droughts in U.S. history, we're still producing a tremendous amount of corn. This will be the 8th largest corn crop in U.S. history. If we look globally, it'll be the 2nd largest corn crop in world history. We're only about 2.5% off what we expected this year globally in terms of corn. But as you look around the world, the U.S. is dramatically ahead of the rest of the world in terms of yield. So as Monsanto and Syngenta and DuPont Pioneer take their technologies globally, we're going to see those corn yields go up around the world. And the United States will become, although still important, a smaller and smaller percentage of the total corn produced around the world. There's also my friends from Sioux Falls, Raven Industries, their Applied Technologies division, I know we're here today. They're looking at technologies that also help that equation as well, because as we better understand the fertility in the field, as we match that to GPS technology and control planting, as we look to improve the efficiency of agriculture, we're going to drive the efficiencies here as well. So there's a lot of technologies in play that will make corn very abundant for us in the future. And then we have the improvements that we made. If you look from 1980 to 2011, you can see there's been tremendous improvements in the use of the corn stalks that we've taken advantage of. We're using 30% less land to produce a bushel of corn. That's driven by yield and planting densities that we've achieved. We're losing less soil. We're irrigating less of our corn crop. In fact, if you look at the biofuels piece of it, 96% of the corn that is going into biofuels production is non-irrigated. Most people don't understand that. So we're using very little water in the production of that corn for biofuels. We're using less energy to produce a bushel, and we're producing less emissions. If you look at yield improvements in ethanol over the course of this last decade, you can see that we're dramatically increasing the yield. POET is operating about 2.9 to 2.95 gallons per bushel. We lead the industry because we have some unique proprietary technologies we're practicing, but the whole industry has improved their yield of ethanol from a bushel of corn. If you look at the natural gas used to produce a bushel of ethanol, it's dramatically decreased over this decade as well, through efficiencies, capturing power, using combined heat and power in the plant. And if you look at water use, we only The industry uses somewhere between 2.5 and 3 gallons of water per gallon of ethanol. POET's using below 2.5 gallons now through our total water recovery technology. So on average, to produce a gallon of ethanol, it's about 2.5 gallons of water. To process a gallon of oil, it's about 44 gallons. So there's a huge difference in some of the underlying economics of these resources. If you look at what's happened in the last 50 years, and specifically in the last couple of years in terms of oil imports, oil in terms of imported oil peaked in around 2005, and since then it's decreased from about 60% of our use to 45%. Some of that is driven by reduction in driving, lower use of gasoline, improved mileage, but a lot of this is driven by the dramatic increase in the ethanol industry over this period. From 2005 to today, we've almost tripled the size of the industry, delivering now 10% of the fuel into the gasoline market. If you look at American ethanol, if it was considered an import and you looked at it on the scale of what we import, it would be the second largest source of fuel into our liquid transportation market, second only to Canada. Again, most people don't understand that. It's a very large piece of what we use today. If you look at the economics of it, there's generally between a 70 and 90 cent offset between ethanol and the price of gasoline at the pump. Iowa State completed a study here last year and said that over the United States, the range of the United States, ethanol reduced gasoline prices by about $1.09. If we look specifically in the Midwest, where ethanol is more abundant and more broadly used, it reduced the price of gasoline about $1.69 at the pump. So it's having a direct measurable impact on the cost of transportation here in the United States. But there's an obvious question that you have to kind of think about is, should we be using corn or food crops for fuel? Well, a couple of things. One, most people don't understand that the feed corn that we use in ethanol production is really not what you buy in the store. It is feed corn used for animal feed. So that's actually the portion that we're targeting. But another issue, or another point, is that we don't just make biofuels from the corn that we process. We really only take the starch component out of that kernel. We also turn back animal feed, we turn back industrial products, and we can also turn back food products as well. So if you look at some examples up in the upper left-hand corner, this year, by the end of the year, we'll be at a rate to produce about 600 million gallons of Voila oil each year. That's our trade-named oil. That oil could go into animal feed, it can go into biodiesel production, and with some additional processing, it could even go down an RBD route for human food. So there's a lot of uses we can pull out of that oil. CO2 in the upper right-hand corner. On the lower left-hand corner, we're pulling the fiber fraction out of the corn kernel, and that's going into the human food sector as a fiber source in bars and meals and other dietary products. And then lastly, in the lower right-hand corner, zein protein. About half of the protein in corn is a prolamine called zein, which isn't very digestible in animals. It has a lower digestibility than other ingredients. We can extract that and use that for industrial purposes, in adhesives, in binders, in paints, and shellacs. So there's a lot of things that we can pull out of our process that will drive the economy in the agricultural sector and really deliver higher value products that can replace petroleum products in the marketplace. But there's also other sources, and POET is looking beyond corn ethanol to cellulosic ethanol now. So whether it be corn stover or wheatgrass or woody biomass, there's opportunities for us to now go to the next generation of biofuels. This past year in January, we signed a joint venture with a Dutch company called DSM. DSM is about a 12 to 12.5 billion euro company that is in the biotech, food, feed, agricultural space. And we signed a joint venture with them to build our first cellulosic facility at Emmitsburg, Iowa, co-located with one of our corn plants. And that will be our first cellulosic offering. The way the technology will work, POET brought a basic technology to the table for the cellulosic facility. DSM is now coming in with the source of enzymes and a yeast for fermentation that will be dropped into the technology box that POET has developed. And we'll co-locate this facility next to our corn facility there in Iowa. The corn ethanol plant on that site produces about 55 million gallons of ethanol per year. This facility will originally start up at about 25 million gallon rate and then grow from there. POET hopes over the next decade to produce about 1 billion gallons of cellulosic ethanol in addition to our corn ethanol production today. We'll do that by co-locating these facilities at our other corn sites, the 27 other facilities around the Midwest. We then hope to license this technology to other providers in the industry. We hope to create about 1 billion gallons of additional volume through that mechanism. And then lastly, through the processing of other feedstocks, bagasse in Brazil, wheat straw in Europe, possibly grasses in the West. We hope to expand the production beyond these levels to about 3 billion gallons. So POET alone believes we can produce about 3 billion gallons of cellulosic ethanol over the course of the next 10 years through this process. So as we look at the total opportunity, and again, here's just a schematic of the Project Liberty facility. As we look at the total opportunity, today we're displacing with E10 in the marketplace, 10% of the gasoline in the market. E15 has now been passed. We're going to work to have that promulgated, but that'll then move us to a 15% level in the marketplace. Through cellulosic biomass, there's about 1 billion tons of biomass that we can access here just in the U.S. alone, which would allow us to produce about 70 billion additional gallons of gasoline. So in combination with the corn ethanol, we can replace 80 to 90% of our total gasoline needs just through corn ethanol and cellulosic ethanol. When you look at the impact of that to the farming community, last year the ethanol business delivered about $42 billion to GDP. And if we look at personal household income, it delivered about $30 billion directly to household income. So it is having a huge impact on the economics here in the United States, and specifically to the farming community in the Midwest. Today, corn ethanol is operating without any subsidies whatsoever. We're head-to-head with the petroleum industry. That's, again, something people don't understand. So it is competitive, it is in the marketplace, and it is really driving economics. When you look at the final equation, which is, do we have enough corn to meet this need? Here's a chart which shows you the production of corn in 2002. Total, we were producing at a rate of 10.6 billion bushels. Between 2002 and 2011, we've jumped it all the way to 13.5. And that's driven almost solely by the corn ethanol industry, because as it provided price support under corn, we saw more and more acres planted. This year, we planted about 97 million acres of corn. And again, we're going to harvest about, this year in a drought year, in the worst year in history probably, we're going to still harvest about 10.7 billion bushels, the 8th largest crop in U.S. history. You can see where that corn is going. Food and industrial exports, feed use, some people say we take about 40% of the corn for corn ethanol. We really only take about 16 when you subtract out what we turn back in terms of distillers' grains. So the number is closer to 16. You can see the combination of the feed use and then the distillers' grain contribution. So the net use of corn ethanol out of the crop is about 2.5 billion in terms of consumption. One of the last things I'll mention is about indirect land use. Some of you are familiar with the issue with CARB here on the West Coast and the claim that indirect land use is a penalty that should be applied to corn ethanol. If you look at the rates of deforestation around the world, and you look at the growth of the corn ethanol business, that just doesn't jive. And the reason is there's about 1 billion acres around the world of farmland that's not being used today. It's idle. And so as we saw increases in corn and other crops being planted, we didn't see an increase in deforestation. In fact, we've continued to see decreases in deforestation. So the two really don't line up. And corn ethanol has really not driven deforestation in the Amazon or anywhere else in the world. We're simply using crop land that was idle before or not being deployed effectively. As the biotech seed companies come out with better and better strains of corn hybrids that have stronger abiotic stress traits, can take more drought tolerance, we'll see the corn acres increase even more. But again, that's not going to be taking forested land. So I'll leave you with a couple of images. This is just a snapshot of, and it's an artist's rendition, it's not exactly correct, but it's to just reflect, this is the world according to oil. So if you look at the world, it's obvious where the oil is produced. And this is the world according to agriculture. And you look at the countries that can really lead the growth and sustainability going forward in the world. And the United States can play a very prominent role. And so finally, a little thought here. Each consumer of a finite resource really quickens its inevitable exhaustion. So fossil fuels are going away. It's inevitable. There's only a certain limit to which we can pull out of the ground economically and utilize. And then they're gone. And we're going to have to find alternatives. If we If we purchase renewable resources, if we become consumer of renewable resources, it's really a vote for their continued stewardship. It's not a vote for their consumption, but it'll drive discovery, it'll drive innovation, it'll drive the economics of use. And so POET is very bullish on renewables. We believe that this is the path forward, and we're very proud to be in this space and be a leader in renewable fuel.